You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Oh yeah, baby, that's lovely.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Hello and welcome to Psychedelics and Cannabis Educational News. It is, oh my goodness, it's January 19th already, 2023. And we are here live from the legacy420.com news desk on the Pace Radio Network's Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Foxcast, paceradio.net, cbg.tv.com. I mean, we're all over the place.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Good morning, Glenn.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm very good. And yourself?
I'm doing well. I have been noticing that your tropical paradise has been a little wet the past few days.
It's been wet for 6 days, raining. Today's sunny, and it's supposed to be 30 by maybe another hour.
Wow.
I'll take it when I can get it.
That's right. It's incredible. Here in Nova Scotia, we've had a very strange winter. Canada as a whole apparently has been having a weird winter, but Nova Scotia has been having the weirdest. Normally by this point in time, we have inches of snow. And we have had in total so far since the beginning of winter, maybe 1.5 centimeters. It's insane.
I lived in New Brunswick. I never saw anything like that at the end of January.
No, it's crazy. Absolutely crazy. We've got, I was about to go backwards and go to old our times, but I'm gonna stick on the Pace News time. We have 8 stories. I was about to say read for reporters. We have 8 stories today here on the Pace News Reports, and we might as well jump into the first 4 before the break. The first one is kind of controversial. You may hear Glenn and I get upset with the government from time to time during this story. We don't necessarily apologize. We are heading to StratCan. The survey, legalization has improved access to medical cannabis in Canada.
A new report prepared by Health Canada shows that the legalization of cannabis in Canada at 2018 improved access, information sharing, and reduced stigma associated with cannabis for medical purposes. The report is based on 2 surveys, one of 1,205 Canadians aged 16 and up who have used cannabis for medical purposes since it was legalized on October 17th, 2018. The second survey was from a sample of 823 medical doctors and nurses practitioners who have had experiences with individuals accessing or inquiring about cannabis for medical purposes.
Mm-hmm. Of those individuals surveyed who used cannabis for medical purposes, the patients, just over half reported doing so prior to legalization, and nearly half only began using cannabis for medical purposes after cannabis was fully legalized. Of those who only began using cannabis for medical purposes after legalization in 2018, more than half of them said that they were more comfortable doing so because legalization made cannabis easier to access. Half of them, 49%, so just under half, also said they made the decision to use cannabis for medical purposes because they felt more information on the medical cannabis was available post-legalization and stigma was less of a factor. Well, I mean, I agree. The stigma is less of a factor because we have stores all over the place. Is it easier to access? That honestly has to do with what province you're in and how the province is dealing with it. Because for a medical patient here in Nova Scotia, going into a liquor store is not really medical.
No, I guess not. We didn't have that problem in New Brunswick, but I see your point there. Most 71% of those who said they used cannabis for medical purposes reported also using cannabis for non-medical purposes in the past 3 years since legalization. Most of those patients, 66%, said they had discussed their use of cannabis for medical purposes with a medical doctor and or nurse practitioner. Of those who didn't discuss those issues with the healthcare practitioner, fear of stigma was the most common reason. And that's the same with my mother.
Yep.
She was afraid to discuss it with her doctor.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. And last night on the mushy moment, Steve and I, our guest, like, I mean, we talked about how he in school they had to sit down and watch the movie Reefer Madness in school and learn the wonders of cannabis that way. Yeah, yeah. Of those who discussed medical cannabis with the HCP, more than half, just over half, 53% of them received a medical authorization document to access cannabis through the medical cannabis sales stream. Most patients who sought such authorization were given one by their healthcare practitioner, and only 20% who asked were refused by their healthcare practitioner, which is really great. That's coming forward. I still say 20% who were refused is 20% too much, but that's moving forward. Like, I mean, 5 years ago, that would have been 80%. So 20%.
I told you before that my doctor told me it was immoral. He wouldn't do it.
Yeah, which is just insane, right?
Yeah.
Among those who received medical documentation, the majority were either registered with a licensed seller, which is, as we lovingly call the LPs, or authorized to produce their own cannabis. About 1/3 of them, 37% actually, did so through a licensed producer, while 33% grew their own cannabis. Another 13% were authorized to access through a designated grower.
And the most common reasons for refusal were the HCP not being willing to authorize cannabis for patients, which was 38% of the time. A reported lack of evidence to support cannabis as a treatment option, which doctors said 31% of the time, or that the HCP was not familiar enough with the use of cannabis for medical purposes, which was 29% of the time. Cannabis oils, extracts, and capsules were the most commonly recommended product by a healthcare practitioner, 68%. Followed by edibles at 26% and dried flower at 23%.
I'm just going to go back up to the paragraph where it says the HCP was not familiar enough with the use of cannabis. It's nice to know that the healthcare practitioners are admitting this, and I'm going to go with the other ones. Like a lack of evidence to support cannabis for a treatment option. That's probably like going back to the not being familiar with. And I'm glad that doctors are speaking up and saying that, simply because that's going to start, making people raise their eyebrows and maybe get some education in the universities for them.
Definitely.
Yeah. Nearly 1/3 reported being recommended high CBD and low THC products, while 24% said they were recommended equal amounts, so a 1-to-1. And another 19%, they were recommended CBD only, whereas 17 were recommended high THC and low CBD. But do the doctors really know why they're doing that? That's my big question.
Yeah, that's the question.
I have no problems with, like telling somebody they need high CBD, but why are you picking that? Because the education just hasn't been there for them yet. Despite this, 44% of patients reported smoking their cannabis, while 34% say they prefer the edibles. Nearly 1/3 preferred to ingest cannabis extracts or oils, which is the same as edibles. Most patients say they prefer cannabis products that include both THC and CBD, but responses were varied. At 27%, they say they prefer higher THC with lower levels of CBD, while 30% they said they kind of the opposite. 28% said they prefer equal levels of THC to CBD. So it's almost a third, and 13% they said that they preferred a product containing only THC.
Of those patients who access medical cannabis from a licensed medical cannabis provider, 34% said it was more expensive. More than 1/4 said they found the lack of physical storefronts challenging, while 27% they said they could not always get their desired product or had issues with the registration process. Most had no such issues. Of those patients who used dried flower, most said they used between 0.25 grams and 2 grams of cannabis a day. Only 4% reported using more than 10 grams a day. About 17% said they don't monitor how much they smoked a day.
I don't necessarily monitor. I usually go by week because every day is completely different. Yeah.
I went by how I felt.
Yeah, exactly. And we continue on with the story. It tells you a little bit about frequency of use. We get into the healthcare practitioner survey. A second survey also looked at the opinions of healthcare practitioners, with 49% of them saying that there is therapeutic value in the use of cannabis. Another 45% said that there is value at least some of the time. Of those healthcare practitioners who said that there's therapeutic value, to the use of cannabis at least some of the time. 3/4 cited clinical examples that suggested cannabis can have therapeutic value as their reasoning, and over half of them said cannabis was a valuable tool for those instances where other treatment options were not tolerable or effective. And it goes on and on and on with a lot of these stats and whatnot. But I think it's really amazing that they took time to ask the healthcare practitioners. And as we read earlier in the story, there was actually even some of them that admitted that we just don't know enough. So teach us.
I don't think they're teaching it in the universities yet. Haven't heard of a program yet.
No, not yet. Not yet. I'm sure there's plenty of excuses. Well, we have to do this and we have to do that, so do it. They're
going to wait 35 years and then they're going to say, "Oh, it works."
Yeah. Yeah. But on to the next story, because we could go on and on and on about that story for the entire program. We're heading over to Mugglehead Magazine. Apex Labs doses first patient in a veteran's take-home psilocybin drug trial.
A Vancouver pharmaceutical company has dosed its first veteran patient with a GMP-certified synthetic psilocybin drug, which is called Apex 52, in the comfort of their own home. Apex Labs announced on Wednesday that in its phase 2B trial, Apex 52 had progressed to the patient dosing phase. The trial is aimed at treating anxiety and depression associated with post-traumatic stress disorder in the veterans community.
Okay. So I'm sorry to repeat, but a Vancouver pharmaceutical company has dosed its first veteran patient with the GMP certified synthetic psilocybin drug. Okay. Well then. The news follows Apex receiving Health Canada approval for the take-home trial last October in what the company believes is the first clinical trial of its kind in history. Well, yeah, you're using synthetics. That kind of blows my mind. Apex CEO Tyler,
why not use the real thing?
The real thing. I mean, there's plenty of it. Absolutely. And they're so easy to grow. So super easy to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So super easy. And you could use the real thing, God given. But
I think the difference is they own Apex 52. They don't own the real thing.
Yeah, it's all about the big dollar bills for sure. Apex's CEO, Tyler Powell, pointed out last November that the unregulated psilocybin products veterans were consuming to treat mental health issues may have unpredictable potency levels and questionable safety, which is not the case with Apex 52.
Yeah.
Hey, Cindy, shut up. We only have an hour.
We know veterans are self-medicating with microdoses of unregulated psilocybin products, continued Powell, adding that this was the first time a North American patient had taken a pharmaceutical-grade psilocybin drug in the privacy and comfort of their own residence. Apex Labs says it has reserved the ticker symbol Apex with the NEO exchange and that it currently has the NEO private company sticker Apex L. The company has a private shareholder base of more than 300 investors and recently updated investor deck available for viewing as well.
Mm-hmm. Synthetic magic mushrooms. Did they not watch what synthetic THC did to us?
They don't care. They want to own it, period. Nobody can make that but them, so they own it. They don't own the mushrooms.
Oh, it's just gross. It's just gross. They're going to harm more people than help people. And I say this, based on the synthetic THC from years ago, and I think they still have it. I was on that, and it did me it was so hard to get off of. It was super addictive. It was so hard to get off of. It was just, and I mean, here they are trying to ruin psilocybin.
Yeah, it's going to happen again and again.
Again and again and again and again. And we will report on it, and I'll sit here and shake my head at it again and again and again. We're heading over to the conversation. Alberta's there are some beautiful psilocybins. Alberta's new policy on psychedelic drug treatment for mental illness. Will Canada lead the psychedelic renaissance? I certainly hope so.
Patients in Alberta will now be able to legally consider adding psychedelic-assisted therapy to the list of treatment options available for mental illnesses. Alberta psychiatrists and policymakers suggest that they are getting ahead of the curve by creating regulations to ensure the safe use of these hallucinogenic substances in a therapeutically supported environment. As of January 16th, the option is available only through registered and licensed psychiatrists in the province. I wonder how many are doing it though.
Probably not many, but even one is a start.
Yeah.
But somebody who's really been trained by a shamanic healer with psilocybin. I mean, fingers crossed, right? But I mean, the government likes to screw everything up, so who knows? But that's just my opinion. Alberta's new policy may set a precedent that moves Canadians one step closer to accepting psychedelics as medicinal substances. But historically, these drugs were widely sought out for recreational and non-clinical purposes. And if cannabis has taught us anything, medicinalizing may simply be a short stop for decriminalizing and commercializing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Psychedelic drugs, aka medicines, including LSD, psilocybin, which we commonly know as magic mushrooms, MDMA. You might have heard of ecstasy, which is MDMA, but with a bunch of additives to be squished together to make a pill, and DMT, which is made into ayahuasca, the ayahuasca drink. So you can vape it for the short term or drink the plant-based one for a longer term. They're criminalized substances, and in most jurisdictions around the world, and in most jurisdictions around the world, but some people are suggesting it is time to reimagine them as medicines. A few places are even considering decriminalizing psychedelics altogether, claiming that naturally occurring plants like mushrooms, even the magic ones, should not be subject to legal restrictions. Well, we've been saying that about cannabis for 100 freaking years.
Yep. In the wake of cannabis reforms, it appears that psychedelics may be the next target in dismantling the war on drugs. Canada made bold strides internationally with its widespread cannabis decriminalization. But are Canadians ready to lead the psychedelic renaissance? There is some precedent for taking the lead. In the 50s and the 60s, an earlier generation of researchers pioneered the first wave of psychedelic science, including Canadian-based psychiatrists who coined the word psychedelic and made headlines for dramatic breakthroughs using LSD to treat alcoholism.
Vancouver-based therapists also use LSD and psilocybin mushrooms to treat depression and homosexuality, while homosexuality was considered both illegal and a mental disorder until later in the 1970s. So that was just because of their wrong beliefs back then. Psychedelic therapies push back against these labels as patients treated for same-sex attraction more often experience feelings of acceptance. So it worked, but not in what the government thought it was going to work. Reactions that aligned this particular approach in Vancouver with the gay rights movement. Despite positive reports of clinical benefits, by the end of the 1960s, psychedelics had earned a reputation for recreational use and clinical abuse. And there was good reason to draw these connections, as psychedelic drugs had moved from pharmaceutical experimentation into mainstream culture. And some researchers had come under scrutiny for unethical practices.
Most legal psychedelics ground to a halt in the 1970s with a set of regulatory prohibitions and cultural backlash. In public health reports since the 70s, psychedelics have been described as objects of unethical research, recreational abuse, and personal risk, including injury and even death. Underground chemists and consumers tried to combat this image, suggesting that psychedelics provided intellectual and spiritual insight and enhanced creativity.
Mm-hmm. Do they ever? Most jurisdictions around the world criminalize psychedelics, whether for clinical research or personal experimentation. Indigenous and non-Western uses of hallucinogenic plants, of course, stretch back even further in history. And these too came under legal scrutiny through a combination of colonial pressures to assimilate and a looming war on drugs that did not distinguish between religious practices and drug-seeking behaviors. In the last decade, though, regulations prohibiting psychedelics have started relaxing. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has designated breakthrough therapy statuses to MDMA and psilocybin based on their performance in clinical trials with post-traumatic stress disorder and treatment-resistant depression, respectively.
Health Canada has provided exemptions for the use of psilocybin for patients with end-of-life anxiety and has started approving suppliers and therapists interested in working with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. Training programs for psychedelic therapists are popping up across Canada, perhaps anticipating a change in regulation and the current lack of trained professionals ready to deliver psychedelic medicine. At the moment, the next generation of scientific research on psychedelics still lags behind the popular enthusiasm that has catapulted these substances into the mainstream. Celebrity testimonials and compelling patient accounts are competing for our attention.
Meanwhile, the growing burden of mental illness continues to overwhelm our healthcare systems. Psychedelics are being held up as a potential solution, but magic mushrooms are not magic bullets. Historically, hallucinogenic substances have defied simple categorization as medicines, spiritual enhancers, toxins, sacred substances, rave drugs, etc. Whether or not Health Canada or the province of Alberta reclassifies psychedelics as a bona fide therapeutic option, these psychoactive substances will continue to attract consumers outside of clinical settings.
And Canada has an opportunity to take the lead once more in this so-called psychedelic renaissance. But it might be our chance to invest in more sustainable solutions to harm reduction and ways of including Indigenous perspectives, rather than racing to push psychedelics into the medical marketplace. Indigenous approaches to sacred plants are not only about consuming substances, but involve preparation, intention, and integration, often structured in ritualistic settings that are as much about spiritual health as physical or mental health.
The cosmology and approach does not easily fit under the Health Canada Act, nor is it obvious who should be responsible for regulating or administrating rituals that sit outside of our healthcare system. These differences in how we might imagine the value of psychedelics is an opportunity to rethink the place of Indigenous knowledge in health systems. We are well positioned to take a sober approach to the psychedelic hype, which has been driven in large part by financial interests, of course, and consider what aspects of the psychedelic experience we want to preserve.
Now may be a good time to reinvest in our public institutions to ensure that psychedelics don't simply become another pharmaceutical option that profits private investors. Instead, we have an opportunity with psychedelics to rethink how a war on drugs has harmed individuals and communities, and how we might want to build a better relationship with pharmaceuticals. That goes right back to the last story.
Yeah. We don't necessarily want to build, build with the pharmaceuticals, but we do want our medical professionals to learn the natural ways, so they can advise on both ways and let somebody make up their mind for themselves. Yeah, for sure. Last story before the break, we are heading over to StratCan, and we're going to talk about how an OCS bug gives some retailers early access.
Okay, sorry, I was on the wrong story there for a second.
No worries.
An error in Ontario's new ordering system for cannabis retailers experienced a glitch in recent weeks that led to 115 retailers getting access to 94 different SKUs weeks in advance of the official release date. The orders were inadvertently shipped to retailers due to an error in the OCS's online B2B portal, launched late last year. The portal allows retailers to review available products and place orders, and also allows retailers to download a spreadsheet with similar information.
While 70 products were listed as coming soon until January 18th, the OCS says an error in their system allowed any retailers who ordered via spreadsheet to successfully place an immediate order. The error was addressed last week after the OCS was made aware by some retailers, and the remainder of these products were not available until January 18th. For a window of time, some products with the coming soon status had an available quantity associated with them, allowing retailers to add these products to the cart using the import order function. The OCS said it was said in an email sent to retailers on January 16th.
Although the import order function is available to all retailers, it is more commonly used by retailers with more than one location. Orders were inadvertently sent to both independent and corporate stores, adds the OCS. Because of this, some smaller retailers who didn't utilize the import order function say they are frustrated that some larger chain stores were able to get an advantage by being able to sell products a week or more before they were.
Yeah. Sarah Soterick, the owner of the Flower Pot on Dundas in Toronto, says she became aware of the issue when she found at least two new high THC 28-gram offerings listed on 2 chain stores' competitors' websites and shelves. To Sarah, this gives another advantage to these large, well-funded chain stores, giving the demand for low-cost, high THC ounces like those she identified: a spinach sonic lemon fuel 28-gram flour skew, and the other one was the Three Saints Kush Cookies, 28-gram. StratCan also confirmed that availability of these two as well.
Soterex says her biggest question is why the order was allowed to go through once identified, and that she is concerned the apparent error gives an unfair advantage to those stores who purchased it early. Everyone is looking for high THC ounces, and they have to be cheap, she said, and that's the 2 SKUs I could identify that they got an advance receipt of. Of course they did.
I know I've placed orders on Monday morning, and by Monday afternoon, they've told me that I could, things I couldn't have. So why couldn't they do that in this instance is beyond me. There's like 5 or 6 points in the supply chain where they could have caught that order and they didn't. A representative of the OCS says the products were sent out before they realized the error, noting that they are currently launching 600 to 800 SKUs every quarter.
We are currently piloting enhancements to our ordering process, and these products were able to be ordered and shipped to retailers before we were made aware of the error, said David Roderick, Senior Director, Communications and Social Responsibility at the OCS. The error has been fixed, and we are working diligently to improve our internal operations and processes so that the right safeguards are put in place to ensure errors like this do not occur again. Omar Khan, the Senior Vice President of Corporate and Public Affairs at High Tide Inc., the parent company of Canna Cabana, shared this statement with StratCan.
Some weeks ago, we noticed that the OCS erratically made some products available for the January release early on the order form. We were one of several retailers that alerted the OCS to the error they made, which they subsequently corrected. It is our understanding that from the OCS that this error allowed for the early purchase of the SKUs by all retailers. We look forward to more communication from the OCS on how they plan to prevent this from happening in the future once they have completed their internal review. Amber McGuire, who is the CEO of Hippies Next Door, an independent retailer in Wharton, said she understands why some in the industry might suspect foul play, but that she suspects the reason was more benign.
I love that name, Hippies Next Door. There's going to be a lot of paranoia surrounding corporate stores getting favored until these unfair kickbacks get canceled, explains McGuire. The fact that corporate stores are receiving kickbacks from licensed producers for data sales has created an atmosphere that lacks trust. Kickbacks have nothing to do with the Ontario Cannabis Store, so it really isn't their fault, but that is the climate we are existing in right now. Adding that because they explain the distribution of these sales that were made in error, it leads me to believe that they are very aware of the lack of trust.
Yeah, well, this is the second time that this has happened to them. They
completely shut down a couple of months ago.
Yeah, it's been crazy. They've been having lots of glitches, so I would be kind of suspect too, to be honest. Yeah, but that story is done. That means it's break time. It's time to medicate. And Glenn and I will be right back after a session. And you're watching the Psychedelics and Cannabis educational news source here at paceradio.net and cbgtv.com.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
Cannabis edibles are an effective way to manage pain and other ailments, especially when you deal with your trusted partner, Legacy 420, in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. You see, we lab test every product on site to ensure proper dosage every time, which is critical when consuming cannabis edibles. All Legacy 420 edibles are made by our classically trained baker and chocolatier, and we also have super tasty vegan options.
Our baker has been in the industry for 25 years. She's also a chocolatier. Everything from savory to sweet, your chocolate bars, brownies, butter tarts, you name it, we make it.
Talk to our knowledgeable Cannatex about our incredible variety available. Give your trusted partners a call. Legacy 420 out on your road.
In February of 2022, the Victoria Cannabis Buyers Club and Ted Smith were fined $6.5 million. This for helping 8,500 patients with access to medical cannabis. In our interview with Ted, he spoke to us about how people can donate to help in an upcoming court challenge. And here is part of that interview. From what I've seen lately, I believe that you've got something that you're trying to do as far as fundraising to deal with this next court challenge.
For now, people can write checks directly to Jack Lloyd Law Corporation or send e-transfers to save the VCBC at gmail.com. I guess those are the two easiest ways for people to help right now.
PACE Radio is the People Advocating Cannabis Education Radio Network.
Are you watching television on Roku, Fire, maybe an Apple TV or even Chromecast? If you are, then download the Boxcast app and search for CBG TV.
CBG TV broadcasting to a worldwide audience. Find us at cbgtv.com. You're watching the Cannabis Broadcasting Group here at cbgtv.com.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.
And we are back, and I didn't click buttons because I was doing dabs instead. But we are back. We are live with the Psychedelics and Cannabis educational news here at paceradio.net, cbgtv.com, and on your Roku or Fire TV. And I am just getting into hitting all the buttons because we've got 4 more stories coming to you now before we are done for the day. And we are heading first over to MSN, I believe it is. A psychedelic program for treatment of stroke. New clinical trial begins dosing.
Canadian clinical stage psychedelics company Algernon Pharmaceuticals, newly created subsidiary Algernon Neuroscience, has dosed the first subject in its phase 1 clinical study, a proprietary 4-formulation DMT AP188. The trial is being conducted at the Center for Human Drug Research in Leiden, the Netherlands. Renowned psychopharmacologist and Algernon consultant Professor David Nutt commented that while a significant number of promising stroke drugs have failed because they were focused on trying to be neuroprotective of the brain during a stroke, preclinical data shows that DMT is promoting neuroplasticity, a key mechanism in recovery once the stroke has occurred, which is a new and exciting approach to stroke treatment.
Is it ever? The purpose of this phase 1 study is to identify the safe, tolerable, and pharmacokinetics of the IV-administered DMT, followed by prolonged infusion for durations not yet clinically studied. As there have already been several phase 1 studies successfully conducted on DMT, Algernon is not anticipating any serious adverse events or safety issues arising from the study, and expects the data generated will help plan both phase 2 acute stroke and rehabilitation studies more effectively.
This phase 1 study is an important milestone as we advance our investigations of DMT for the treatment of stroke, CEO Christopher Morneau said. We anticipate receiving data from the study in 2023 and potentially beginning phase 2 studies in stroke patients by the end of the calendar year. DMT is a psychedelic that belongs to the tryptamine substances family and is an agonist of multiple receptors, including serotonin and sigma-1 receptor.
Wow. The latter is a multifaceted stress-responsive receptor that promotes cell survival, neuroprotection, neuroplasticity, and neuroimmune modulation. Whew. DMT promotes the release of brain-derived neurotropic factor, the BDNF, a protein that can aid in stroke recovery.
Geez, I'm glad you got that word, not me.
Thanks.
Based on what we know about DMT, I believe a prolonged infusion of subpsychedelic dose compound will be safe and may activate multiple neurodegenerative pathways, including elevations of BDNF, said Dr. Rich Strausman, author of DMT, the spirit molecule, and Algernon consultant. Such effects may prove beneficial in ischemic stroke patients acutely and in their self-rehabilitation.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
There's the DMT molecule there. Well, that's really exciting. I wasn't expecting that when I picked that one. That was really cool. DMT is
DMT for stroke.
Yeah, it's quite the amazing medication. Now, I'm still curious because they didn't say what kind of DMT they were using for this study. So we don't know if it's the NN or if it's the, my goodness, 5-MeO. And there's another one that isn't coming to my brain and there could be way more. I don't know. So I'm curious as to which kind of DMT they're using, plant-based or frog-based.
Or human-made.
Yeah, because there is that as well. Yeah, so I'm curious. That's actually really really exciting that they're doing that. And I know other stroke victims. I know a lady from years ago. She had cured herself with I shouldn't say cured herself, but she helped a lot of those pathways come back with just cannabis. And even more recently, of course, people have been using psilocybin because it helps to get the neurons firing correctly in our brains. So DMT for stroke. That's really cool. I can't wait to see what it holds in the future. But heading on to the next story, we're heading over to Bazinga. Where are psychedelics headed to in 2023? These two heavy hitters share their plans. And before we
it's the beginning of 2023.
I was going to say, before we even get into this, I just want to say that I'm really excited
2023
that all
and
of these
psychedelic companies. Sorry, I seem to be having a computer problem here.
No worries. I was just saying that I'm really excited.
20.
Go ahead. Oh, lag here.
Yeah, we have some lag happening. I don't know if she can hear me or I can't hear her.
Yes, go ahead.
In the beginning of 2023, psychedelics companies are updating the public on their developmental and clinical process, as well as their selected milestones for the year. Cybin incorporates its term goals regarding the CYB003 and CYB004 clinical programs, with CEO Doug Riley believes will provide important information to help strengthen the company in the progression of its investigational therapies towards undertreated mental health conditions.
And just in case you don't realize, yes, we are live here at paceradio.net. And I was just trying to say earlier that a lot of these stories are coming out of Canada, and that's just really exciting. A lot of these psychedelic stories are coming out of Canada, and I am beyond thrilled. The proprietary psilocybin analog CYB003 is being assessed in a phase 1 and 2A study for the treatment of major depressive disorder. As a deuterated form, I think, of first-gen psychedelic, CYB003 is designed to potentially address the challenges and limitations of oral psilocybin, such as variability in plasma levels, medicine onset, and duration of effect.
Interim results from this phase 1-2A trial will be shared in February and will include the safety of pharmacokinetic profile of the drug, such as observations of the characteristics and duration of its psychedelic effect. The findings would provide information on the necessary dose ranging from the upcoming clinical studies of CYB003, as the company aims to secure more consistent and predictable dosing and reduced intra and individual variability.
The other property, the other proprietary psychedelic, CYB004, is an intravenous DMT designed for the treatment of anxiety disorders and is being tested in a phase 1 trial on its safety and dosing optimism. We were just reading about that. In its natural form, DMT is rapidly metabolized in the body and is not orally bioavailable. Something CYB004 could overcome by increasing oral and pulmonary bioavailability, producing faster onset with lower doses, lower inter-subject variability, and better dose titration for fewer side effects compared with oral and IV DMT, as preclinical results show so far. So before I let you talk, I am just going to say they're worried about the side effects. Well, if they weren't remaking this in a lab, they might not have to worry about that. I've used plant-based and frog-based DMT and I've not had a side effect. So weird.
I wonder if you're exception to the rule or you are the rule. Most people don't have it. I'm not sure yet. To date, the phase 1 clinical trial has not shown any significant safety or tolerability issues. Psychedelics expects to translate key learnings from the initial study, including dose optimization and dynamics, to the development of the remaining planned cohorts, and will most likely share an update on this program in February as well. Mind Medicine Incorporated corporate update and outlook for this year includes readouts of the results of phase 2 LSD clinical trials, the launch of a new compound clinical program, and a solid cash flow to support its operations all the way into 2025.
Following a year of continuous strong execution, our progress in 2022 has set the stage for a meaningful 2023, a year in which we plan to further elucidate the potential of our MM120 products candidate in generalized anxiety disorder, initiate the first clinical trial for our MM402 program, stated CEO Rob Barrow. Barrow added that the MindMed's focus remains on progressing its programs. Specifically in 2023, the company expects to share key data of its phase 2B study of MM120 for the treatment of generalized anxiety disorder, and on its phase 2 trial of repeated low-dose MM120 for ADHD. But the new 402 phase 1 trial, all of which would be funded by the company's strong financial position well beyond the key milestones and up to the first half of 2025. I love how they're renaming everything. I mean, I don't know. Are we still talking? Are we talking LSD now? Are we talking? Are we still talking DMT? Are we still talking? I mean, I'm not sure what we're talking now.
It's really hard to tell if we're talking about a new product that they made themselves.
It's weird.
MM120 is MindMed's proprietary form of LSD being developed primarily for the treatment of GAD. MM402 is the R and enantiomer of the MDMA and it is designed to treat the core symptoms of autism spectrum disorder. With preclinical results of MM402's effects to be presented in the first half of 2023, the company plans to initiate the first clinical trial this year assessing tolerability, pharmacokinetics, and pharmacodynamics, as well as early signals of efficacy on core symptoms of ASD.
On the other hand, University Hospital Basel in Switzerland is one of the MindMed's regular collaborators, which is currently enrolling participants for a phase 1 trial comparing tolerability, PK in acute subject, psychological, and endocrine effects. MindMed expects to host a virtual analyst and investor day in the first half of 2023 to be hosted by the company's management team. Of course they do, because that's why they are coming up with all of these chemical substitutes for our natural medicine, is because they want to make money, so they need investors.
And they own it then. They own that chemical then.
Yeah. Okay, well, on to our next story. MJ Biz Daily, 4 states. So we're heading down to the U.S. 4 states have a good shot at legalizing recreational cannabis in 2023.
If the Minnesota state capitol feels different lately, it's not just because the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, enjoying the trifecta control of both houses in the legislature, plus the governor's office for the first time in 10 years. It's also that cannabis as a detectable whiff from the direction of State Rep Jessica Hansen.
A second-term lawmaker whose first foray into politics was serving an executive director for a legalization advocacy organization. Hansen co-sponsored bipartisan adult use legalization legislation and was reintroduced last week. Believe it or not, that was a real tongue twister of a paragraph. The bill, which passed the State House last year, is expected to get a friendlier reception this year in the now DFL Majority Senate. Well, here's hoping.
We elected people at a grassroots level to the legislature in this state who care about this issue, said Hansen, believed to be the first admitted cannabis consumer elected to state office in Minnesota. Admitted, I guarantee she's not the first. The rosy outlook and fresh momentum of legalization in Minnesota, where the Democratic governor has promised to sign a legalization bill into law, can be seen across the country in 2023.
At least 4 states, Ohio, Oklahoma, and Pennsylvania, in addition to Minnesota, have a good chance to legalize adult use cannabis this year, observers and interested parties told MJ Biz Daily. Oklahoma voters will decide on legalization in a March 7 special election with only cannabis on the ballot.
It's believed to be the first time in the United States that the cannabis is on the ballot by itself, with no candidates or other voter initiatives. And unless the Ohio General Assembly overcomes recent reluctance and adopts a voter-initiated proposal, by May 3rd, a well-funded and organized campaign to qualify legalization for the November ballot in that state is already operational.
Though many details in the state legislatures are still pending, including questions of local control, social equity, and other issues, even the potential conflict is encouraging for Hansen. We're having a fight at the Capitol over how to legalize, not whether or not to legalize, she told MJ Biz Daily.
Elsewhere, advocates say the time is ripe to lay the groundwork for more ambitious wins, and some are plotting longer shot efforts in the Carolinas, Indiana, and New Hampshire. This year's state action comes from after legalization advocates achieved mixed results during the November 2022 midterm election, with 2 victories and 3 losses.
We're just going to stop here for a second on this particular map. They are showing us that everything in orange is recreational and medicinal. If it's just green, it is just medicinal, and if it's like Texas here in gray, it's still illegal. So, I mean, the whole country is getting there. There's 2,
it's almost
4,
a
5,
map
6.
of Republican and Democratic controlled states.
Yep. In addition to Minnesota, state lawmakers in Pennsylvania are renewing a serious push to legalize adult use cannabis, this time in a friendly political climate that bode well for legalization. I'm getting texts at the same time that we're talking, and it catches my attention for half a second. Through odds in Pennsylvania, although odds in Pennsylvania are a little longer, with control on legislature currently split between Republicans and Democrats, legalization still has a vocal bipartisan support, as well as an endorsement from the governor.
It was a group of GOP state senators who unsuccessfully tried to convince former U.S. Senator Pat Toomey, a Pennsylvania Republican, to support Safe Banking Act in Congress. They'll be asked again to back State Senator Sharif Street, a Democrat, and Dan Laughlin, a Republican, who introduced a legalization proposal in October 21 that so far has stalled out in Harrisburg.
The 2 have vowed to try again this year, but for now, the State House currently has no majority party, and likely won't until a February 7th special election to fill 2 vacant seats. That complexity aside, bipartisan legalization bills have in the past made limited headway in Minnesota and Pennsylvania before running into mostly bipartisan roadblocks that have since been lifted or eased. The Minnesota House, for example, passed a legalization bill last May, only to have a Republican majority block the bill from advancing in the Senate.
There's still work to lobby some Senate Democrats, but that's expected to be an easier lift, Henson told MJ Biz Daily. They're going to some people who need to be educated. She said, there will be some Democratic senators who are apprehensive and nervous and scared.
Mm-hmm. Legalization might also be boosted by fears of a recession as COVID-19 pandemic federal spending disappears from the state budget and lawmakers search for new revenue sources. In Pennsylvania, industry advocates believe reluctant lawmakers under more pressure to move forward with adult use legalization after successes of the state's $2 billion medical cannabis industry, as well as the 2022 openings of recreational markets in the nearby New Jersey and New York.
It's actually a little sad that this is become another money thing. It's not a thing about people's health. It's about money for the state.
It's always about money.
Whether Democrats end up with the outright majority in the state legislature, the party's strong showing certainly gives us the best chance that we've had in several years, said Meredith Bretner, an executive director of the Pennsylvania Cannabis Coalition, which lobbies on behalf of multi-state operators. A looming $2 billion budget deficit in Pennsylvania in fiscal 2023-24 also means incoming Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro, a legalization supporter who takes office on January 17th, will be under pressure to find new sources of revenue.
He might deploy a revenue-generating argument during his state budget proposal, the first major policy speech of his term. If cannabis is included, that could signal legalization as a priority. So we'll see.
I'll be way more bullish if Shapiro mentions legalization, Bretton added, but either way, we're in a better situation than we've been in. And like Shapiro, who received an A+ rating on NORML's voter guide, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is pro-legalization.
Yes, Walz has vowed to sign a bill that reaches his desk, and he has told interviewers that he expects lawmakers to send him one. So here's hoping. This story does go on for a little bit here, and you can go have a read. But it is 4 more states that are looking at adding adding some color or changing their color on this map, and I think that that's really exciting. And as somebody who is looking forward to doing some traveling stateside, I hope more and more do it, because I want to be able to go see the whole thing, not just bits and parts that are green friendly.
Mm-hmm.
There's the saw. I heard the saw.
Truck. Maybe there's a truck coming up the road. You might have heard the saw too. I'm kind of ignoring all the sounds.
It only just caught me because we were silent for half a second. Of course, if you don't know, Glenn is in Costa Rica and coming to us live from Costa Rica, where his house is basically a tree house, and he gets to. He's sitting in his living room right now with no walls. So we get to hear the birds and the nature, and it's gorgeous. Yeah.
There's my living room.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So yeah, and we were talking about how his neighbor has a saw down the road, but it could have been a truck, which is just all very cool. I've been hearing the birds throughout the whole program, and it's just really neat. Every time I hear a song, I sit over here and smile. But we're on to our last story now, coming from my favorite publication, The Fresh Toast. After just talking about 4 states looking to legalize adult use, we're going to talk about this state seems to be next in line for adult use sales.
The challenge of the state's industry will be to avoid some of the pitfalls that other states are experiencing. And Missouri is launching its legal adult use cannabis sales on February 6th. Last month, on December 8th, 2022, consumers were allowed to legally possess up to 3 ounces of cannabis, and the Department of Health and Senior Services began accepting requests for existing medical facility licenses to convert to a fully legal facility. Once approved, it is up to each dispensary to decide whether it will begin selling adult use cannabis. And I bet you almost all will say yes.
Immediately, yeah. Now, according to the industry analyst from BDSA, adult use sales of cannabis in Missouri will reach $277 million in its first year. I think they're underestimating, with a total market revenue projection of $730 million for 2023. Currently, there are approximately 208,000 Missouri patients utilizing medical cannabis on the books, which is about 3% of the state's population. But the number of cannabis consumers in the state is expected to swell to 600,000 under adult use, which is roughly 10% of the population. I think it's going to be more than that. According to Mocan Trade, the cannabis industry was responsible for one of every 10 new jobs created in Missouri in 2022. And as adult sales commence in early 2023, cannabis businesses across Missouri will be expanding operations and hiring to meet expected demand.
There is no question that Amendment 3's impact will be beneficial for the Missouri workers. SWADE alone anticipates its staffing needs will increase between 30 and 45% prior to recreational retail sales commencement, said Jason Nelson, who's the CEO of SWADE Cannabis. The coming 12 months will see an immense amount of growth in the industry, and that means adding a lot of new jobs for the state. While other mature states have faced issues with high taxation, falling prices, and slowing growth, Nielsen thinks Missouri will avoid that.
Well, here's hoping. Missouri is a unique position is in a unique position with regards to other states, Nielsen said. We are launching an adult use market in response to the voters' wishes, indicating there is built-in level of demand right at the start. There is typically a percentage of consumers reluctant to cannabis under a medical-only market that becomes less hesitant in an adult use market, and we expect Missouri to be no different. The challenge of the state's industry will be to avoid some of the pitfalls that other states are experiencing. Neighboring states inhabit, circumstances that make cannabis tourism amongst bordering populations a viable prospect for Missouri, whether compared to significantly higher product tax rate in Illinois or neighboring states such as Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, and Tennessee that have no representation under a regulated cannabis program. Missouri is well positioned to leverage a robust menu of high-quality cannabis products available at affordable prices. I felt like I just read a commercial for Missouri tourism there with that last paragraph. Whew.
Seems like they're looking for tourists, which most of the states and most of the places are not looking for tourists. It's kind of refreshing to hear that.
There are some places, and I can't quote on which ones because I don't know exactly which ones offhand, that only allow residents to purchase, right? So I mean, and that's another big thing, and I'm not sure if it's anywhere in the States, but there are places overseas that you have to be a resident to purchase it, like Malta. I've got a friend who's been over in Malta, and you have to be a resident to purchase.
In Costa Rica, where I am right now, medical only and only for residents.
Yeah. I mean, Holland, Amsterdam, is looking at trying to change that to go so it's only residents. So I'm working on getting myself over there before they switch that, because it's every hot smoker's dream from my generation to head over to Amsterdam and sit there and smoke some hashish in one of the cafes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And with that, that's our Reefer Reporters for today, January 19th, 2023. As we close the show, we'd like to thank you and our sponsors of Legacy420.com and Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. Plus a big thank you to you, our viewers. Catch our next broadcast with Reverend Kelly and Al on Monday. And don't forget Al's tagline. Don't forget to educate, medicate, and do not incarcerate. We'll see you guys next week.
Pura Vida.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
When you have a pain that's reached its peak, Legacy for 20, it's so unique. If organic cannabis is what you seek, here's your trusted partner 7 days a week. Suppository salves, vapes and drops, topicals, edibles, infused pop. Just when life seems like it ain't easy, at Legacy 420, enjoy a pop freezy. Lab tested products, make them the GOAT. Legacy 420 out on your road.
Legacy 420 in Tyndonega Mohawk territory. Indigenous organic cannabis at its finest.
What do you find at paceradio.net? People advocating cannabis education.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.